One court case that was big on the minds of Americans this year was the challenge of the Affordable Care Act and the individual mandate that the act requires. Now, we saw this deliberated on the dates of March 26th, 27th, and 28th of this year. The decision came to us on June 28th. What this was called was the National Federation of Independent Business versus the Secretary of Health and Human Services. What the challenge was 26 states were suing the federal government, stating that the individual mandate was unconstitutional. What the individual mandate is if you are not covered by an employer insurance program or a government insurance program and are not eligible to receive one, you will be required to purchase health care from a private organization. If you decide not to purchase health care from a private organization, you would be penalized with paying a penalty to the IRS. Depending on whether you're single or married with children, depends on how much you would pay. This being said, the state of Florida began the lawsuit, which made its way through the Court of Appeals to the Supreme Court, stating that you cannot force somebody to buy goods or services, which is what they felt this law is stating. So, as it played out in the courts, it was fought that this individual mandate was unconstitutional. Another portion of it was the expansion of Medicaid. What this was is that the way Medicaid is run in the states now is left up to the states by the federal government. Well, now the federal government would step in and want them to recommit to a new Medicaid program, and if they would not commit to a Medicaid program, the U.S. government would not provide them funds for their Medicaid program. In the end, the decision was made that the individual mandate would be upheld because the way the Supreme Court looked at it was not as a penalty as it was to a tax. Based on the Constitution, the United States Congress does have the right to levy a tax. So, with a small margin, the Supreme Court said it was constitutional. However, the Medicaid mandate of restructuring Medicaid or being punished by losing money from the federal government was deemed wrong. They stated that the federal government could not use a muscle-type tactic to force a state to come in line with what it thinks is right. In the end of it all, there was a strong disdain from the Supreme Court justices who had decided that this was unconstitutional, and the states are still attempting another way around, whether it be through lawsuits that are now being levied by private organizations such as the Catholic Church to prevent this law from coming into effect because they feel it steps over religious boundary which is governed in the United States Constitution, or whether it be by just not accepting or not getting on board with the actual program. In the end of it all, you had reviews from both sides. Some people think that the reason that this really plays out to be wrong is that as the law was processed, the executive branch and the legislative branch of the United States stated that what would be paid if you did not get health insurance would be what was called a penalty, not a tax. So they pressed and pressed and pressed that this is a penalty to prevent people from thinking that they would be taxed. However, the Supreme Court ruled that this is a tax. Even after the Supreme Court ruled that this was a tax, the administration continues to say it's a penalty. So that's where some people wonder, how does this really play out? If it's said in the law it's a penalty but it's not a tax, how could the Supreme Court rule in this direction? On the other side of the aisle, it is seen as a victory because people believe this is going to provide the health care reforms that the United States has been looking for years, and they believe that this Supreme Court ruling just proves more that the law is good, it's decent, and it will take care of American needs. My analysis on the issue is I tend to agree with the side who agrees with the fact that it is a penalty, not a tax. The way it's stated in the law is that you would be penalized, not taxed, if you were to not purchase health care insurance. I strongly believe that the Supreme Court did get this one wrong by stating that it is a tax, giving Congress the power to tax, and they, in a sense, took the way the law was supposed to be written before and after the ruling, stating that they read it as a tax, whereas it was pushed by the lawmakers as a penalty. So in the long run, I look forward to see what happens in the future. This is an election year, so I am excited to see if this is a driving fact for the November 6th election of this year. In conclusion, This Supreme Court case was one that was much looked forward to. It was a disappointment for some, a victory for others, but in the end, the Supreme Court has ruled, and we will see how this plays out in the future.